My first guest is Brandon Arnold, Executive Vice President at the National Taxpayers Union. Sir, when did we start this narrative that there's no negotiating and no discussing? We just raised the debt ceiling.
I think it started pretty much right after House Republicans said, let's negotiate over the debt ceiling. Because if you look any further back from that, Democrats have worked with Republicans time and time again. They put together packages, sometimes good, a lot of times lousy, to constrain spending and increase the debt ceiling. And that is all they're asking for here today. It wasn't that long ago when Obama was president, Democrats controlled both houses of Congress. And when they increased the debt ceiling, they actually put in place pay-go rules. These are budget caps on spending. So they did it unilaterally, and now when Republicans are asking for the same exact thing, or hopefully stronger provisions, all of a sudden they're irresponsible and they don't care about the future of our economy. It is just a really ridiculous turn of face here.
Well, what the Democrats don't like is the Republicans gutted about 70 of the $80 billion that was supposed to go to new IRS agents. They gutted the green energy tax credits, $570 billion over the next 10 years. They capped discretionary spending at $1.47 trillion. Democrats don't. You see, and I'm going to say this in my argument in the next segment. With the open border, the Democrats can't afford to have spending caps because they can't give the store away to the non-citizen.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously true. The more the population grows, the more demands there are on spending, especially when you have lower income people coming into the system, because they do put an additional burden on programs like Medicare, educational programs, and so forth. So, yeah, I think there's a lot more to the story there. Of course, there's a lot of programs that the Democrats are just, for some reason, reflexively opposed to any kind of spending restraint. And sometimes Republicans are just as guilty of this. You look at the Defense Department. Yeah, we want to make sure we have as strong a national defense as we possibly can. But we all know there's waste in those programs as well. And to go through those with a fine-tooth comb, I think would give the Republicans a lot more credibility on these issues and be able to turn things on Democrats who are absolutely unwilling to look at any programs, any department, any kind of spending restraint or cuts, which is absolutely what we ought to be doing, especially coming out of this pandemic where we spent more than $4 trillion, about $5 trillion on the pandemic response.
Look, I am not going to lay this only at the feet of Democrats. Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell were pretty much just as bad, if we're being totally honest, right? If Washington was getting it right, we wouldn't be even discussing raising the debt ceiling. What we'd be talking about is paying off the debt instead of raising the ceiling. When they say, well, we're servicing the debt, that's a lie. The idea that you make a minimum payment, that borrow more, that you raise your own credit limit is absolutely insane. When they say, well, this is money that's already been allocated, already spent. Yeah, I get that. But now we're going to go to $33 trillion. And Chip Roy questioning Jody Arrington, the chair of the Budget Committee, says the path we're on right now with current spending, we're going to be at $50 trillion.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and you look at the amount of interest payments that we're spending just to service the debt, as you said, and it's going to exceed the entire budget of the Pentagon in just a few years. So you're going to see these interest payments, and of course they get higher now that interest rates have climbed. You're going to see financing the debt, squeezing out other parts of the federal budget. What do? Well, we raise taxes, of course, which slows the economy, which puts us into this economic death spiral that I'd rather avoid if we can possibly do so. You know, and the other thing, you look at state governments who also use debt instruments at times. They use debt instruments to finance capital projects typically. So you need a new infrastructure project. You need to construct a new building. Then you use debt. They don't use debt the way the federal government does, which is just to keep the lights on, to keep paying this growing federal bureaucracy. So it's just a completely wrong-headed approach to governance that we need really to level set here. We need a complete reset on the way this government is financing its operations. And this package that we put together, I like it, but it's only taking a pretty small direction in the general direction we need to go.
Yeah, well, look, they could have put the penny plan in there. They could have put the flat tax in there. Well, it's going to die in the Senate. We know it's going to die in the Senate, right? But that's exactly what Chuck Schumer was saying earlier, that, you know, you pass your thing, you give us the hot potato, and we go back and forth. I mean, capping spending to 2022 levels, you're right. It would be nicer if it was maybe back 2019 levels, you know, during the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. I mean, the idea that federal spending is going to be capped at 1%, it's still growing. I mean, I don't know where we say to ourselves, Whether Republican, Democrat, progressive, or conservative, okay, it's over. We can't go any further. Because at $13 trillion, we were calling it a crisis. That was $20 trillion ago.
Right, yeah, and there's no end in sight. That's the problem here. We're going to keep raising the debt ceiling. We're going to keep going through this exercise. But I give the Republicans a little bit of credit here. They've put together a pretty good plan. Now, the problem is that the Democrats have made this look like the extreme draconian kind of cut plan that it really isn't. It cuts $4 trillion, but it really wouldn't even do that, because that 1% escalator that you talked about, that's going to be undone by future Congresses. The only cuts that we're going to get are things that we're able to enact immediately. And then if you put in budget caps going forward, they need to be reinforced with supermajority requirements. We did this in 2011 when we raised the debt ceiling. We passed the Budget Control Act. Obama signed that. Schumer voted for it. Pelosi voted for it. And that put actually some legitimately reasonable budget caps. They held up a little bit. They saved us a couple $1 trillion over 10 years, but Congress undid them multiple times. And that'll happen again. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try here. It doesn't mean we can't put up a fight and we shouldn't put up a fight. That's absolutely what we need to do. But we need to be realistic that Congress is always going to need to be constrained, always going to need to be watched by groups like mine, by people like you, Andrew, if we're going to have any hope whatsoever of getting this deficit under control.
No, the bottom line is we can't continue to increase the number of people who receive from the government, shrink the number of people who provide for government. And if somebody says, well, we're the richest country on planet Earth, so what? You know, I mean, Joe Biden will go out there, the Democrats will go out there with their anti-capitalist rhetoric, but the Financial Times says that Joe Biden's asking Wall Street donors for $1 billion. So clearly, the Democrats don't hate Wall Street. But the truth is the people that really pay the freight for all this are the people that are not poor enough to be subsidized and not rich enough to be influential. I got 20 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is that we're not even talking about a social safety net anymore. We're not talking about taking care of the poorest Americans. What we're wasting all this money on, this energy package, costs over $1 trillion. The numbers actually are way worse than it appears. But it's subsidizing electric vehicles for people making six figures. We're not even talking about helping
we're saving the planet,
Americans.
right? Saving the planet.
Yeah.
I got to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great weekend.